All right, the Indiana Pacers are headed to the NBA Finals, which I think is going to create kind of a really good, fun basketball matchup in the finals. I know the ratings police not going to be as happy with that matchup, considering a lot of people wanted to see the Knicks, seeing MSG, Timmy Chalamet, and Kylie Jenner. Kind of Timmy's the new Spike Lee, basically. He's the one that travels to all the road games and is wearing those awesome outfits and yeah, Ben Stiller as well. And I do think the MSG would have made an interesting finals atmosphere, but I think we're getting much better basketball having Indiana in that mix. I think they're a little bit deeper than the Knicks are. The Knicks are they have so many flaws that I think, especially you look at this game six where Indiana made them pretty uncomfortable. And if you think Indiana's going to make you uncomfortable, wait till you face OKC. And I just don't think that style of basketball, especially with Tibbs and how vanilla that they tend to be on offense at times. I just don't think that they stood any chance against OKC. I think Indiana could maybe steal a game or two in a matchup like that, but I do think looking at these two finals teams, I think it's further proof that the big three era is kind of dead. And I'll explain what I mean by the big three era because you look at Shea, Chet, Jalen Williams. That's a big three. But the reason that works is because Chet and Jalen were in the same, and I guess I should say J Dub to not get confused with the two Jalen Williams on the same team, which is always a fun thing. But Chet and J Dub were taken in the same draft. So obviously they have more financial flexibility with that kind of big three than the traditional, especially in today's NBA world. You're going to have to acquire, I don't know, three contracts that are $50 million or more, which is why I laugh when Dallas ends up getting the first overall pick in the draft. The big question is, oh, are they going to trade that pick in order to get Giannis? And it's like they can't do that. You can't have three players making around 40 to $50 million on your roster, especially with this second apron stuff. Like it's just not going to be a sustainable way to build out the rest of your roster. And I think that's more true now than it really ever was. And I wonder if teams are going to kind of take the Sam Presti model where they're going to value younger players' picks. Because I think part of the reason the Big Three era really doesn't work as well anymore is not only the financial aspect of things. Again, it's really hard to have three players making 40 or $50 million on your roster and expecting to compete at a high level. But I think it's just the fact that the NBA is way more talented now than it ever has been. I mean, you look at teams that are putting out rosters going eight deep, nine deep. I mean, I think even the Pacers in some of these games against the Knicks, they were 11 deep. And and I just think you're no longer in that situation where, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, you would have a defensive specialist in your starting lineup that couldn't shoot worth a lick. Now everyone can shoot, whether you're a point guard, shooting guard, or even a center. Like everyone in the league can shoot. And we're just at a point where the talent level is at a completely different spot than it used to be. So it's no longer that aspect of let's get three really good players together, a la, I don't know, Phoenix this past year. Well, I guess 2 years ago. Phoenix in recent memory, bringing in Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, obviously already having Devin Booker and saying, you know what? We're going to get that big three, and then we'll worry about the rest later. We'll fill in spot up shooters, defensive specialists, and maybe get a good rebounder in there, and we'll be able to live off of that. I just think that era is completely over. And even looking at kind of the big threes and maybe the 2010s, the Miami Heat were able to do it because LeBron, Wade, and Bosh all took less money. And the salary cap was kind of unique when LeBron, pardon me, when Kevin Durant was a free agent and went to Golden State, which is why that was able to work. It wouldn't quite work in today's financial state of the NBA. So that's kind of the big thing that I look at with these finals. Like and even last year, I think with Boston and I would even say Dallas, like depth is way more important these days than anything else. We're no longer in that era, and you kind of see it with. I think now we're going to have our what seventh different champion in the last 7 years or whatever it is. Like we're no longer in that stretch where you had the Miami Big Three that went to four straight finals. You had the Golden State Big Four, I guess you would call it, that went to four straight finals. Like I think those days are in the past, and I think drafting, developing, and asset management is way more important. Again, it used to just be, hey, let's get the three big guys. Where again, I go to Jay Williams on ESPN right after the Mavericks won the lottery. He's like, oh, you got to give it up for Giannis and worry about the rest later. That's no longer the recipe. And that brings me to, I guess, my next point. Obviously, Giannis is kind of the biggest domino in this offseason. And he's the big fish that a lot of teams are going to target. If there's a trade there, I'm still not sure if he's really going to want to leave Milwaukee. I think him saying that he's open to the idea of a trade. Sure, I bet he's open to an idea of trying to win a championship elsewhere, but I still don't know if he's 100% all in on a trade. We'll just have to see how that stacks up. But I would be really hesitant to trade for Giannis if I were most NBA franchises. I know that sounds a little crazy considering, I don't know, what is he, the third best player in basketball right now after SGA, Jokic, whichever one you want to put one to. Obviously, this finals will help decide that for a lot of people where SGA ranks for most people. But although Giannis is the third best player in the league, I think a lot of these teams that a lot of people are bringing up as being interested in a Giannis trade or should be interested in a Giannis trade, they either don't quite have the assets to acquire Giannis, or if they do give up said assets, you're going to kind of be left with, Giannis on your team. If you do trade for Giannis, you're going to be left with him and then maybe some spare parts. And that's where I look at a team like Houston. And I think a team like Houston, I'd be really hesitant to trade for Giannis because everything that made you great this past season, you're gonna have to part with that. And I mean, from their perspective, they're probably hoping that you bring in Giannis and have Amin Thompson to go along with it, which is a really interesting duo there that would be tough to play on a nightly basis. But in order to acquire Giannis, you're probably going to have to give up Şengün, Jabari Smith. You're going to have to find one of those bigger contracts at least to make the money match, whether that's Van Fleet. Obviously, I think they have a team option that they have to exercise, but if they accepted the team option and included him in the deal, that would make the salaries work. Dylan Brooks, those kind of players you're going to have to attach on there, plus picks, whether it's the Phoenix picks or their own. So I think that's where it gets a little bit interesting. Like you're going to part with a lot of what made you really good last year, and you're going to kind of swap out. Like if it was Amin Thompson and you have Giannis, like Giannis is better than Şengün, clearly. But does that completely solve Houston's issues that they had last year, where shooting was sometimes a problem? They would go on those incredibly long scoring droughts. Does Giannis completely solve that? Again, he upgrades from Şengün, but you already kind of had an interior presence, not only defensively but offensively in Şengün that could really have some impactful games. And while Giannis will be a little bit better than that, like a lot better than Şengün, I still have questions if that really solves the issue at hand, where you kind of need a go-to scorer late in games. And Giannis can do that. He can go get buckets, but he's not a particularly good shooter. I think Houston would be much better served going after Kevin Durant, which I'm still not really sure what a KD trade package looks like at this point in time. I think that's a little bit of a weird subject because you would think on one hand, Phoenix is at the point where they just want to get out from under the contract. Obviously, Kevin Durant is going to be 37 years old, is on an expiring deal, way past his prime. And it seems like Phoenix would be more interested in draft capital. Like, I wonder if you could easily maybe dangle one or two of their picks that Houston owns right now, Phoenix's picks, You could dangle one or two of those and throw in a Van Fleet. Like, could that be enough to where they're like, all right, but the problem is like you'd be bringing in the big contract. Van Fleet's going to make 42 million if they exercise that team option. So does that really make sense? Do you really want to get out from under the KD deal and you acquire Van Fleet? Like that's, I don't know. There's a little bit weird in terms of economics how that's going to work, but my gut feeling is you won't have to give up. I know you won't have to give up as much for Durant as Giannis, but there could be a chance that this KD deal isn't as large as you would think, especially considering when he was traded 2 years ago, how much Brooklyn got in return for him. But at the same time, Giannis again is kind of that domino where, like, if Milwaukee comes out and says we're not trading him, or if they do trade him, a lot of these other teams that are looking to upgrade their teams, I look at a team, you know, similarly to like Detroit. Detroit might be kind of that sneaky Kevin Durant destination to where I really like how he would fit in there. I know Minnesota was another rumored one, but they have so many financial questions going into this next season with Randall's option as well as Naz Reid. So I don't know how they're going to sort that out if they're really a true player for a guy like Kevin Durant. But that's where it gets a little bit interesting, where I would think his value is going to be particularly lower than Giannis. But again, a lot of teams, Durant's going to be kind of their second option, their backup plan. And there might be a lot of demand for a guy like that. It's just, I'm curious to see what a trade looks like for Kevin Durant because I we had talked about it. I was watching I think First Things First a couple months ago, and they were talking trading Jalen Green being kind of the big piece in a KD trade, which you would easily do. Obviously, you still have to make salaries work, but if you don't have to give up a crazy amount for KD and you're able to keep Amin Thompson, Jabari, and Şengün and bring in KD, that seems way more attractive to me for a year or two than trading the boat for Giannis. And the other reason I think the Giannis trade, I'd be a little bit hesitant to just make that trade and worry about the rest later. A lot of people feel like trading for Giannis obviously opens up this avenue in the future to where you can really compete. But I don't think that's going to be a 7 or 8 year window the way I think other people think. I think, and it's dependent on the team. Like I keep bringing up the Jay Will thing. I'm talking about Jay Williams at ESPN talking about the Mavericks trading for Giannis, which I think would be absurd for them to do. Um, because you just traded your, long-term franchise, face of your franchise superstar at age 26 for an aging, often injured veteran who's a good player, who's an awesome player. Anthony Davis is a top 12 player in this league, but again, you had that long-term stability with Luka potentially for the next 10 years. You have just been delivered a gift from the heavens, getting the first overall pick in this upcoming draft and that long-term stability again. And people's argument's going to be, well, they're already putting all their eggs in a basket. They've got Kyrie and AD already on this timeline. Let's bring in Giannis so we have all three of them. You're going to have to give up, obviously, probably Klay Thompson, Gafford, PJ Washington, plus Cooper Flag, plus whatever else Milwaukee would ask for. But you have to give up those players just to make the salaries work. And if you bring in Giannis along with AD and Kyrie, you're talking about three players. Giannis is going to be 31 come December, I believe. And then next year you're going to have AD and Kyrie in that 34 to 33 to 34 age range. Like, and we don't know when Kyrie's coming back next year. So I'm not even sure that gives you next season to compete. So we're really talking about like at most probably a 2 year championship window where you're going to have three really expensive players, not a lot of depth, and three players that I wouldn't even just say two players that are often injured in Kyrie and AD. We know that those two players tend to struggle with injuries, especially AD. They call him street clothes for a reason. But Giannis, in two out of the past three playoff runs, he's missed games. He's got some injury issues. And for a guy that's about to turn 31, for a player that plays predominantly downhill, are we certain that that is a game that is going to age very well into 32, 33, 34, 35. For a guy that plays that downhill at that size that already is experiencing some lower body injury issues, coupled with the fact that he's not a particularly good shooter, I I'm not so sure that's a game that's going to age particularly well. Everyone's acting like you're going to get 7, 8 years of Giannis, but I think it's going to be more like you're going to get 3 really good years of Giannis, and then the rest is kind of up in the air. And you're just going to have to pray that he stays healthy. Who knows? Maybe like we've seen players really late in their careers improve their shots, but I would doubt at age 34 Giannis is going to figure out, the shooting aspect of things. But I don't think he's going to age like LeBron. Again, the reason LeBron works so well, not only is facilitating, not only the fact that he's probably the most durable star player that we have ever seen, but also the fact he improved his jump shot. His jump shot's way better than, I mean, you look at that first Miami championship that he won. I think in the finals he shot like 17% from three. Like he was not a particularly good shooter, but as he aged, he started adding things to his game, the post up part of his game, and the shooting, the free throw shooting's much better as well. So I think that's why LeBron, not only with the durability but also getting better at shooting, was able to age better. And I worry about that with Giannis, right? So like to me, there is only one team, at least one that I've seen, you know a mock trade that I've seen presented that I truly do think makes sense. Who knows? Maybe people will have like Pacers ideas from the outside, some sort of Knicks trade that could make sense. I don't know, like a dark horse Giannis suitor. But the only ones out of the popular ones, because I've seen a lot of Houston, I've seen Dallas, and the one that I think really makes the most sense to at least have a conversation about is San Antonio, although insider reporting has suggested that the Spurs are leaning towards just making the Harper pick and moving forward with that, which again, there's some questions about a De'Aaron Fox, Castle, and then Dylan Harper kind of trio, how that would kind of work, as they're all very similar players. But you talk about the timelines of Castle, Harper, Wembanyama might make a little bit more sense. But if I were the Spurs, not only do I think they have the most attractive assets, in terms of their draft capital, and in terms of, I think they'd have to give up Castle in the deal as well. Castle and then Harper, the pick for Harper, the second overall pick, who I assume would be Dylan Harper, and then whatever other picks, salaries to make a contract or to make a trade, like that quite work out pretty well. Um, and I think it puts you on a timeline where you have Fox, Giannis, Wembanyama, which Giannis and Wemby would be so fascinating to watch. And I think they obviously it's been well documented that although they're two bigs, it would work incredibly well since Wemby likes to play on the perimeter and Giannis could get inside. It does put this kind of clock on Wemby though, where it's like, okay, you're going to try to compete in this window. Are you ready to do that? And the West is incredibly loaded next season. Like we're talking, I think Rick or pardon me, not Rick Carlisle, Chris Finch, Minnesota Timberwolves head coach, was talking about it the other day, saying like 13 of the 15 teams in the Western Conference could be above 500 next year, and there are going to be some really good teams that don't, just miss the playoffs, but miss the play in, and that's how deep the Western Conference is. And so you have to kind of decide for yourself, if you're a team like San Antonio, do you really want to go for it right now? Or would you rather maybe play the long game, let OKC have their little reign these next couple of years, and then wait until they have to pay Chet and J-Dub and see, probably going to have to let Lou Dort go, whether Hartenstein is still in the mix, Caruso, whatever. Is that a better idea to kind of have that phase out? But at the same time, like, as deep as the West is next year, I think OKC is really the only team in the Western Conference that like scares you to think like, do we really want to go for it when OKC has their reign? But outside of them, I mean, Houston had an awesome year, but they're incredibly young and still don't have that go-to scorer. We'll see what they do this offseason. I just suggested the Kevin Durant thing, but we'll see where that goes. You look at Minnesota, like as fun of a run as it's been, as fun as Ant is to watch, I think we could all agree that they really had the bracket break in their favor. And so getting to, I mean, let's give them credit for the Lakers win. I thought the Lakers would win that series in 6 or 7. I mean, a lot of people thought the Lakers had a chance to win the West. We'll give them credit for that. But looking at that Lakers Timberwolves series, like that they matched up really well with the Lakers. And then they got a little bit lucky where Steph missed the second round. I think that's a much better series if Steph plays. They won the first game in the series. I still think the Timberwolves were probably the favorite, but I think that's a 7 game series right there. So their run to the conference finals, like the bracket broke incredibly well for them, and I think that's something we could acknowledge as luck. Denver, I love I love Jokic. I like a lot of parts of their starting lineup, but they're a very flawed basketball team. I mean, they have four legitimate, at least this past year, I think they had four legitimate starters, NBA starters on that team, NBA players maybe on that team. Porter Jr. obviously really banged up, and they were trying their best with a very thin rotation, and it just the fact that they took OKC to 7 is incredible. But I still don't think that's a team I'm looking at like, ooh, I don't think we can necessarily compete with Denver on this realm. The Clippers, the Kawhi Harden thing is fun, but how far is that really going to get you long term? Golden State, I mean, Steph, Draymond, and Jimmy, another year older. Like what suggests that next year is going to be 100% better? Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it will be, but I don't really think so. So while you look at the standpoint of OKC could have their reign these next couple of years, outside of them, as deep as the Western Conference is, I still don't think being the second best team in the conference is that unattainable. So you might look at it as San Antonio and saying, this might be our window. Might be a little early than people might have thought, but there might be a really good window for us to compete here. And you never know. Like teams this past year in the Eastern Conference are looking at the Tatum injury. There's an avenue there in the Eastern Conference where it's like maybe we shouldn't trade Giannis. Who knows if things fall our way, we could make a deep run. You don't know what's going to happen over at OKC, and I'm not wishing this, but there could be a serious injury that completely changes the way we look at the Thunder next season. You just never know. So I think if San Antonio acquired Giannis to go along with Wemby, De'Aaron Fox, and I still think they would have enough capital with Wemby on the contract he is to build out the rest of that team to where it's not that I know I just said the quote unquote big three. I don't really believe De'Aaron Fox complete, no disrespect to him. I don't think he really completes a big three there, but it kind of is. I think that's one you could kind of work around a little bit. So San Antonio is an interesting one. I personally would probably just draft Harper and figure out the rest of the stuff later. Keep those young guys kind of on the same timeline and keep your depth and see where it takes you. But like I said, that is probably, San Antonio is the only team that I would be really having meetings about going, should we do the Giannis thing? Should we maybe entertain the idea of that? A lot of other teams, unless there's some dark horse that not really is on my radar. I know some people are going to talk about the Warriors, even though I don't know what assets they have to give up to Milwaukee to make a move like that. I I think San Antonio is the clear, not only most attractive package for a team like Milwaukee, but I think the team where it really makes sense to where you can trade for Giannis and still have an incredible team around him and to compete at an incredibly high level. Going back to last night's Pacers-Knicks game, pretty intrigued with how the Knicks kind of move forward here because it's really interesting. This has been an incredible year for them where they made an incredibly deep run and we're just 2 games away from the NBA Finals. And I think if you would have told a Knicks fan that at the beginning of the year, they'd be like, "Yep, we're all in. Hit the buzzer, hit the button. Yep, I'll take that any day of the week, no questions asked." But the negativity over this series has kind of maybe changed people's perspectives. You're always going to have that Tibbs conversation. Is he the right coach for this team? Are they going to get enough offensively? And trust me, as a Bulls fan, I'm a Chicago Bulls fan. I saw that firsthand for a long time. Obviously, we bursted onto the scene in 2010 to 2011 as an incredible defensive team. Derrick Rose's MVP year. Tibbs got us to the conference finals, something we hadn't done in a really long time. And we even smacked the Heat in game one in 2011. And I remember we were chanting, I was at game one and we were chanting overrated. And I thought we were going to the finals. I thought we were definitely going to the finals, but obviously we took our licks the next four games, and the Heat ended up going to the finals. But from that point on, like the Tibbs experience is an interesting one to where defensive intensity is going to be through the roof. You're going to have a winning culture. You're going to make deep playoff runs, right? But you always have that little bit of feeling of like on the offensive side of the ball, are we ever going to be able to win four playoff rounds playing this way on the offensive side of things? And that's where the Tibbs question comes into reality. I would imagine Tibbs will be back. Bringing the Knicks to a conference finals to a game six. I mean, literally 2 wins away from the NBA finals and what was a really memorable year for the Knicks. I think you kind of have to run it back. I don't think you really have much of a choice to just move on from something like that. But it's a really tricky situation because you could look at the Pacers last year, who got swept in the conference finals, and they didn't overreact to it. They didn't blow anything up. They said, you know what, let's give it another year and let's bring it back and see what happens. And now they're in the finals. And did they maybe get into some luck with Tatum being injured? But who knows? The Knicks probably still could have beaten. I still think they would have beaten Boston in the best of seven with Tatum out, because I think they would have taken the 3-1 lead regardless of what happened there. And they get what, 3 chances to close it out. There's a chance Boston wins 3 games, but I wouldn't have been a betting man in that point where I think the Knicks they showed that they were the better team, excuse me, in those first 4 games and ultimately the series. So do you look at Indiana last year, who stayed patient, ran it back this year, got to the finals, especially with the Tatum injury going into next year? Like right now, I would say Indiana, Cleveland, New York, like that's kind of the way it's looking. It almost feels like when MJ retired that first time and teams were kind of looking around like, and I'm not comparing Jason Tatum to MJ, but I think with the Celtics and the way that they had kind of dominated the Eastern Conference last season, you're kind of looking at it now. It's way more wide open. It's Cleveland, Indiana, and New York. Like those are the 3 teams right now that look poised to do something. So do you look at that and say, you know what, why not just run it back? We'll be a little bit more familiar with each other next year. We can learn from this playoff experience and apply it to next year and see what happens. That's a fair point. There are also some tough things where it's like, again, offensively, it's pretty vanilla. I find it really hard to believe that you can win 4 playoff rounds playing that way. And the Brunson Cat thing, there's times where you're just like, man, you could see how this could work, but it almost feels like it doesn't. And with Karl Anthony Towns, I think he's one of the more interesting players in the league, where he's clearly a top 15 player who, when he goes to the rim, is incredibly dominant. I thought he had a really good series offensively against Indiana, where he went at Turner a few times and really kind of overtook some of these games. I mean, I think probably for the series had to have averaged 22 to 24 points with 13 rebounds. Like that tended to be the way he would go. It's the way he just always seems to prefer to be a perimeter player. I think that tends to be a flaw of his. Obviously, he's a little reckless. Sometimes going to the hoop. You saw yesterday where he just completely grabbed that dude's arm and going to the bucket. It's a clear offensive foul. And he's put his hands up like, what the hell happened? But it's like clear, like, and on the defensive side, he takes really dumb fouls, and it puts the Knicks in a terrible position where they've got to roll with Mitchell Robinson, who they love. They love Mitchell Robinson, but there's times where you have to just roll with Mitch and keep Cat on the bench for extended periods of time, and offensively that can wane on you. And for a team that's already Tibbs doesn't really he did a little bit better this series in trusting some of those bench guys, but for the most part, there's not a lot of belief in that bench. And so for an already thin group, you're going to take out your second best offensive player, and sometimes he's your best offensive player with how aggressive he can be. Um, Plus, coupled with the fact that the cat, he's a defensive liability, and when you have him and Brunson both on the floor defensively, like that can be a problem. So there's going to be conversations of do we maybe try to move off of Cat? I think Brunson would be a little bit harder to move off of just because I would rather keep the guard, that is as clutch and prolific and create his own shot. Um, than I would rather keep him than to trade him. And I'm not sure what a Brunson trade looks like. Seems pretty insane, especially with the way the city has fallen in love with Jalen Brunson. It'd be pretty crazy to trade a player like that at this stage of his career. But also with trading Cat, like what does a trade like that look like? Because he's obviously a somewhat flawed player. And when you saw that trade this past season, where it was him for Randall, like Randall, also a flawed player. At first, we were like, is this a lose-lose trade? And then we got to a point where in the playoffs, we're like, that's kind of a win-win because Randall was awesome those first two rounds for Minnesota and felt like he found that comfortable place. And Cat helped lead New York to the conference final and had some really good moments throughout. So that's where it's a little bit fascinating. Now it looks more like a wash. It's like, are these teams really that much better after that trade? Maybe. Also, maybe not. The Wolves ran into the same exact situation that they did a year ago. And the Knicks, I mean, if they weren't crazy banged up in game 7 against the Pacers last year, probably would have made the conference finals and lost and got, punked in that conference final against Boston. So are they really that much better, either of those teams, or was that trade kind of a wash since they're both flawed players? So I don't know what New York would look for in a Carl Anthony Towns trade. I bet they're a little frustrated with his, defensive performance throughout the playoffs. And I think he's got to be better at controlling himself and not getting into foul trouble. It's a little bit reckless to where if he was a little bit, obviously the turnovers too from that Knicks team last night were terrible. And there's a lot of, I think part of it too, part of that transition issue yesterday could fall on that. I mean, he had several plays where Cat is out of control, falling out of bounds and way behind the play. And the Pacers just had so many different opportunities last night where in fast break opportunities, even off of made baskets, like they just had the odd man rush so many times. So I don't know where they go with the Carl Anthony Towns trade this offseason. Because again, you're probably going to have to take on another flawed player, but you start thinking about a big with Brunson, and you want someone who would be really good in pick and roll situations. And I thought that would be there for Brunson and Cat, but it just never seemed to really flourish in that sense. And maybe there's a coaching change. Maybe I like the roster, and I think they're like the way the roster is right now, I think is obviously good enough to make a finals because they were 2 games away from it. There's some style and play things there where I just think they need to find more of an offensive system that suits them rather than just Brunson dribbling till there's 6 seconds left on the shot clock and settling for bad shots. I don't know. But yeah, the Knicks offseason is going to be pretty interesting because I think there's a lot of options on the table, but they might look at, again, the Pacers from last year who are now in the finals this year and say, you know what? Let's run it back. Let's learn from these struggles. And maybe next year could be the year that we make it to the finals. I guess I'll give a finals prediction. OKC all year long, I have believed was going to win the West. Although I didn't like the conversations about them throughout the regular season, I felt like most people were just like crown them. They're not going to have any turbulence this postseason. I didn't quite see it that way. And we saw it in the Denver series. I mean, it went 7 games, and that's a very flawed Denver team. But there's just so much talent on that OKC team, and I think The two moments I think that they really, I wouldn't say realize their potential, but like we always talk about young teams need to take their licks in the postseason. The two, like, I think culture, I don't know if culture setting's the right word, but the points where I really felt like they reached that next level, right? Where they reached championship level, kicking Denver's ass in game seven. Like that was a big moment. Where they kind of finally knocked out Jokic after, after 9 rounds. Um, well, I guess in that case, 7 rounds, but I was using a boxing term there. But then I think the game four against Minnesota, I think was also a very big time culture setting win where that was a 2-1 series, game in the balance, and they closed it out. And doing the same thing against Denver, remember in game one where they did the follow up three thing and it didn't work in their favor then, but it worked then. And their free throw shooters were awesome down the stretch and helped close out that game. And that was a big time win for them. I think the Pacers match up a little bit better than the Knicks do in a series like that. I think the Pacers can get 2 games out of this. I really do. I think they're that resilient to where OKC always likes to go on those like 17 to 2, 17 to 5 runs that are purely sparked by their defense, let alone just offensively. It's just that they'll get 3 or 4 straight steals, run the floor, and all of a sudden you blink and it's a blowout. That's where the Pacers, I don't think, will care. Pacers will be down 15 points in the third quarter. Hell, they'll be down 15 points with 4 minutes left. And I don't think they'll care. You've seen them pull the rabbit out of the hat so many different times. Which the Knicks also, I will say, love to be down 20. That's their thing. But I think the Pacers are really mentally tough where they won't care. To whereas I don't want to say Minnesota phoned it in, but like you could tell right away they were like, yeah, this ain't our series. And I don't think the Pacers would run away. I think down 20, if they were down 20 with 2 minutes left in the fourth, I still think Rick Carlisle would have the full court pressure on on OKC. They wouldn't care what the score is at that point. The Halliburton thing is interesting. I think him and SGA there's going to be some fun aspects between watching those two guys go head to head in a series like this. So I'm pretty fascinated. I think Chet is going to have a real interesting opportunity against the Pacers, kind of in the same way that Karl Anthony Towns kind of became so effective on the offensive end going to the rim. I wonder if Chet's going to be looking at that and saying to himself, like, especially for a player like Chet, as scrawny as he may be, um, he's pretty lethal around the rim. Not only in terms of rim protection, but also getting to the hoop. Like he's a tough player to throw around, as skinny as he is. Which is I've always said if Chet could, he seems like a hard gainer. But if Chet could put on some lbs, like that dude could be unstoppable. And I thought J Dub was really impressive in the Minnesota series and at times in the Denver series. I know he had some games here and there where we were like, is he really a good second option? But I think he stepped up to the podium and has really flourished as a second option over there in OKC. So I'll give OKC this series in 6 games, but I think the Pacers, like, I think they could steal a couple there. And again, I think this is one of those series where you're going to get the ratings police that are going to tell you shouldn't enjoy this finals because it doesn't have a New York team, it doesn't have an LA team, it doesn't have a Boston team. But I really do think if you are a basketball fan, these are two really deep squads that I think play the game the way coaches dream of their teams playing. It's hard-nosed, it's structured, it's unselfish. And I think it's going to be some really good basketball, but I just think OKC just a little bit they just got too much talent. Just too much talent. And it's proven this postseason that their talent, their depth, also Caruso, like being kind of playing the Drew Holiday role. Drew Holiday, what he did with Boston last year. Caruso's kind of doing that this year with OKC. So that's a really interesting lineup that they can put out there and the depth that OKC has. I just don't see any team out there being able to hang with them for a 7 game series. We saw Denver do it. We saw Denver hung with them till game 7, but I just can't see that team losing 4 games. SGA, like you can say what you want about the foul baiting thing, but and it's a real thing. I do think it's a real thing, and it can make him a frustrating player to watch at times. But I don't think that takes away from his greatness. Not many people have a better mid-range game than him. I mean, he's just so good at finishing at the rim, and he's got a great three-point shot as well. He can facilitate. He defends well. Like he's just incredible. And I think this playoff has given him a pretty good argument that he's the best player in the league, and that's something that I don't think a lot of people wanted to embrace. But I do think it's a reality that SGA could be the best player in basketball, especially when I'm sorry, he outplayed Jokic in their series. I think SGA clearly has the better team, but I still think he outplayed Jokic in that last series, and a Finals MVP would put him in really like if he caps off a Finals MVP, I look at it almost from like the Saquon Barkley Eagles season from this past year. When you talk about a singular impressive season from one guy, like this is going to be up there. I don't think this finals with him winning makes him one of the all-time greats just yet, but in terms of this season, like that's it's going to be one of the all-time great seasons if he can cap it off, which I think the Thunder will. I think they win in 6 games, and I think SGA ends up winning Finals MVP. All right, we're going to take a break, and then I'm going to do a little throwback to the 2011 NBA Finals. Kind of deep dived into that series a little bit, so I want to talk about that a little bit after this break. All right, I was able to do a little throwback to 2011. I like to. Sorry, I got to burp real quick. Good push. I like to go back and watch old series, old games where I always like to see how revisionist history kind of sets in, and 2011 is always used as the all-time blemish on the career of LeBron James. That when people have those GOAT discussions, it's always, yeah, but what about 2011, where LeBron completely faltered? And I wanted to go back and watch it because I think it was such a significant series. It was pretty early. As someone who was born in 97, like that was when I was maybe, so I was 13 at the time when that finals was happening. So that was pretty early in my like NBA viewing days. I think 2009 was the first finals I had watched. Um, so that was pretty early in my NBA viewing days, to where I was able to get some I got satisfaction out of that series as a Bulls fan who hated the Heat, and I definitely ate into that hatred of the Miami Heatles off the heels of the decision, right? And being in Chicago and Miami, I think during the time Tibbs was in Chicago, the big three Heat was kind of our biggest rival. I call it a rivalry. We would own it in the regular season, but then they'd kick our ass in the playoffs. But I wanted to go back to that series against Dallas and really see like was that as putrid of a performance from LeBron as the media, NBA fans, social media tends to make out of it. And it's really fascinating going back and watching it, especially knowing how LeBron performed in like 2012, 2013, 2016, especially even 2020, in the Mickey Mouse ring, which I think is a legitimate ring, but I'm just using that as a joke. But I think it's really fascinating to look at that performance in 2011 from LeBron because it's not like he shot terribly. I don't think it's like he shot terribly, right? Where I think if you compare his splits from 2011, which is regarded as his worst finals performance or worst performance maybe in any series, compared to his finals MVP in 2012, at least from the field, he shot very similarly, and he shot way worse from three in 2012. But what was shocking about LeBron in 2011 was just how tentative he was. When you watch that, like it's crazy how tentative he was when you watch it back. Just if it wasn't a shot inside 3 feet, like he's probably not taking it. If it's not a layup, he's probably not taking it. And he's probably deferring to Dwayne Wade, who, is another incredible piece to look back at in 2011 because I think it's very easy to have this revisionist history where you're like, yeah, LeBron joined D Wade, but it was when D Wade was like way out of his prime. 2011, like Dwayne Wade was in that series was the best, possibly the best player in the series, even more so than Dirk. Like Dwayne Wade was incredible in that 2011 finals to where if they won that series, he clearly wins finals MVP. And we're having incredible conversations about Dwayne Wade. Like when you talk about shouldering the load offensively, Dwayne Wade was doing that, and then some. He was incredible offensively. And I just think LeBron just completely deferred to him in that series to a point where I, I don't know if I feel like it's a couple of different things where I'm sure the weight of the decision kind of being painted the villain. It seems like he admitted that he even, I don't know, gave into a lot of the criticism that came from people and the way he was painted um in the general sense of things. I think that probably weighs down on you. It adds pressure to where you're being looked at on this heightened scale. So it's very easy to then go, okay, I don't want to make the mistake. But then being tentative is ultimately the worst mistake you can make because again, he shot the same way the next year, but it's because he was aggressive, that we were able to get different results from that. And I think the other part of it too is to join Miami, to join Dwayne Wade when he had already won a title and a Finals MVP 5 years prior. There's that conversation that you have where who's the guy, right? Who's the number one guy on the team? And there probably was some pressure to let D Wade be that guy at that point in his career. And although it was incredible to watch Dwayne Wade, you could tell when I was watching back that series, like you can't win 4 out of 6 games with Wade being your shouldering this offensive load and LeBron not really getting involved. They were much better suited the year after, where LeBron took over as the guy, and Dwayne Wade was an incredible second option. I think scoring 22 points per game in that finals. That's a much better avenue. Chris Bosh, the third option, who can kind of stretch the floor at times, because I think Bosh was really sneaky good in the mid range game in those years, and on the boards because that was part of the problem against the Mavs was they were getting killed on the boards, especially with Tyson Chandler posing a big problem. The Heat didn't really have a dominant big on that team. Chris Bosh was kind of the four who a lot of times was asked to play the five, and he wasn't that kind of player, but he was good. He could get to the boards, and obviously you saw in 2013 probably had one of the biggest rebounds in NBA history, where he then kicked it back out to Ray Allen for three. But another story for another day. We'll delve into that series a different time. But I think that was the big thing was switching from D Wade being the number one option to LeBron, then becoming the guy the next year. It it was much better for them in trying to accomplish what the ultimate goal is in winning a championship. And I think it balanced things out a little bit better to where that Dallas series, man, like Dirk was incredible. There's no doubt about it. Um, but I think it's just really fascinating to see LeBron, especially when you know what he did in 2016 in just taking over a series and I just seeing him at that stage in his career, 8 years in, he's a much younger player, but it's still like very fascinating to see it. So like when I look back at it, it wasn't that I thought I don't think he was horrible in terms of it's like not like he shot terribly, and lost because of that. It's just he was so tentative. He was so tentative in a way that I don't think you really see from a superstar player. And people are always going to use that in GOAT debates and things like that. But I also like the presentation of the finals back then was so much better. You know, the and then you got Mike Breen, along with well, obviously you still have Mike Breen, but going with Van Gundy and Mark Jackson, the three just had an incredible chemistry between those three. Some people didn't like them because they kind of get off topic a lot. I find that to be the funny part of the game. But they just had so much more chemistry. They added so much. I hate to use the word aura, but it did add aura. Their presentations were so much better. Like they had the kind of the pregame hype videos were just so much better. I like that they were to like cheesy pop music in the 2010s rather than always just being like some sort of Kendrick Lamar song that they insert into a lot of the mixes now. I feel like I love Kendrick Lamar, but I just feel like they had a little bit more. I don't know. They had a little bit more character to them in their old presentations, and I loved when they used to have the big finals logo in the middle of the court. The players had the fine. I don't. Do the players still have the finals patches, or do they not even do that? I just feel like we've gotten so like minimalist in society, and I remember watching the finals last year. I'm like, if you didn't see the finals logo pop up on your screen, you would have felt like you were just watching any playoff basketball game, you know? So just a thought on the presentation. But I thought it was pretty interesting to go back to that 2011 finals and try to see if we were kind of painting the story worse than it actually was with LeBron's performance. Again, like he shot fine, but it's just that the way he was tentative and just if it wasn't a layup, he's probably deferring to Wade. And it also kind of changed the way I view Dwayne Wade a little bit to where we saw a lot of comparisons with him and Harden. You know, this past year, a lot of people think Harden is the better player. But I've never seen Harden take over playoff series like that. And to see Wade not only do it in 2006, nearly do it in 2011. Like if they win the title that year, he wins the Finals MVP. We're putting Dwayne Wade in some really I think interesting conversations if he pulls that off. So it's interesting to see how that kind of kind of panned out in 2011 to but I also think with the LeBron thing, I think it's really interesting when players are able to overcome tough situations. And I think so much of the GOAT, that's why I don't really get into GOAT discussions. Like we expect people to be perfect, and that's just not the way sports, it's not the way the world works. You know, people learn things and use adversity as a way to improve themselves. And I think almost every single finals LeBron has played in, he's been better in the ensuing finals. He was better in 2012 than he was in 2011. He was better in 2013 than he was in 2012, I feel. 2016 was an unbelievable performance. Like I feel like he always had that kind of progression and always in terms of his game, as I discussed earlier, as he's aged, he's always added something to his game. So I don't think it's completely fair to just rule him out of any discussions just because early on, when he was still pretty young, 8 years in, he had a bad finals where he was tentative, but obviously he learned from that and really was able to take over in a lot of the finals that he played in later in his career. So, but I that 2011 finals, I remember when Wade, Bosh, LeBron we're all crying walking off the court. As a Bulls fan, I was eating that up. Me and LeBron's one of my favorite players in NBA history, but like, unfortunately, he's spent a lot of times with the Cavs, obviously in two different tenures, and Miami. So he kind of played on our biggest rival. Again, I say our biggest rival is the Bulls fan, but they'd kick our ass in the playoffs, so I guess it didn't really matter. But he played on teams that I really should be rooting against. But that's just kind of the reality. I've still always really liked him as a player. I'm glad he's in Tinseltown and in LA because it's a lot easier to root for a player out there than it would in Cleveland. But even right now, if he went back to Cleveland, I'd be rooting for them because right now the Bulls are kind of irrelevant, so it doesn't really make a difference in my part. But yeah, it's fun looking back. Rick Carlisle too. Getting back to the finals this year and was able to win the title in 2011 with the Mavs. So it's kind of fun to look at it from that perspective. Obviously, Dirk was unbelievable because it got me thinking too. Like there was the conversations that this Pacers team, if they were to cap off a title, would it be the like most impressive like Cinderella-ish finish to the NBA because that's not really something in the broader history of the NBA that we've seen too often. Um, Now we're seeing a lot more parity, so you're seeing a lot different teams win. I thought Milwaukee when they won was really impressive. I think Giannis's ring is one of the like I always say, and not every NBA championship holds the same weight. And I think Giannis's ring in 21 and then LeBron's ring in 16 are probably like the two most impressive finals wins I have seen. So it's kind of an interesting way of looking back at it. And those conversations kind of made me go back to Dirk in 2011 because I think that one was incredible, especially with some of the teams that they were able to beat. And to me, clear underdogs going up against a big three Miami team. And they won. Not only did they win the series, they won it in six. And Dirk had so many unbelievable closeout moments, and it was awesome for Dallas. And it's really cool to look back on those finals because that was one of the first ones that I had watched growing up. I think the first one was 2009 Lakers Magic. Maybe 2008 Lakers Celtics. I watched a little bit of that, but I was pretty young. But this was one of the first finals that I had really gotten to delve into, and what I thought from 2011 to I don't know 2016. Like that was such a good era of NBA finals to where it was you were in front of that screen no matter, what you had going on in your life. You're like, I need to make sure at 7 p.m. I'm in front of the TV watching the NBA finals, and you get that music, the ABC music playing, and it brings you back to a place, man. So getting to experience that again was interesting. But I'll have to dig deep and find some other series to delve into. The one I was kind of thinking was the 2016 Western Conference Finals where the Thunder blew a 3-1 lead. I was thinking about doing a bit of a deep dive, and obviously we know where what resulted from that in terms of the future of KD jumping onto the Warriors bandwagon that next year. It's kind of interesting to look back at that. So I'll probably deep dive 2016 Western Conference Finals. But if you guys have any sort of series or moments in NBA history you'd like to kind of revisit, I'd be pretty interested to see what you think about that. Well, I think we'll leave that there. I think you guys probably have heard enough of me. I hope you have a great weekend, and obviously the finals start next week, so we still got a lot of NBA basketball left before the kind of dead summer for a little bit. So it's good talking to you guys. Have a good weekend.